I don't want to live in the United States when it loses so much status that another country reaches economic parity. Think about that for a second.
If the Passport Bro movement said, consider relocating outside the United States by 2030, would you listen to us? For most of you, you wouldn't. But what if one of us was a CIA operative, meaning a spy, who also was one of the individuals that held the key to the nuclear weapons, the actual key? Also was an airline pilot who graduated from the Air Force University. Would you at least consider listening to what he has to say if he's saying that he's moving his family outside the United States? Well, Andrew Bartamante is this man who actually was all that I just described. And at the same time, he says that he's going to be moving his family outside of the United States as soon as possible. In other words, the Passport Bros are absolutely correct when we say there are global options that many of us should still consider. Now, mind you, this is not an anti-America rant, so don't think that we don't love our country, 'tis of thee. We love the United States. My name is Andre, and you're watching Love Crossing Borders Travel Unraveled Edition. Make sure you click that like button. We like you. Make sure you like us too. Let's get started with the video. Once again, shout out to the YouTube channel, Diary of a CEO. He does excellent interviews, including Andrew Bartamante. He and his family are not only going to wait until 2030 to leave the United States, they're leaving the United States as soon as possible.
Are you going to leave America in 2030?
I'm going to try and leave America in 2027.
I read that somewhere. Why are you going to try and leave America in 2027?
So I think the United States is going through a very difficult time right now, and I think most people understand that. We are a young country. No matter how much we think that we are the best in the world, we are actually going through the early part of our adolescence as a nation.
And before he goes any further, he's absolutely correct in regards to how we look at ourselves as America and as Americans. Yes, we've accomplished a lot of amazing things in America in a short time, in less than 400 plus years. But yet we still disrespect other countries that have been around for thousands of years, countries that have been empires and have fallen into place. We consider ourselves as an empire that will never fall, but we forget that the Egyptian Empire said the same thing. The Mesopotamian and the Persian Empire said the same thing. The Roman Empire said the same thing, as well as the empires in Japan said the exact same thing, that they would never fall. And yet we assume that our country, 'tis of thee, would not fall. So when you have individuals such as the Passport Bros, Blue Book Gentlemen, and others out there that are saying you might want to at least consider, you don't have to leave the United States. We love the United States. But do realize there are options out there for a lot of us who have our passports.
You can see it playing out every day in the headlines. You can see it in our role in geopolitical events. You can see that we're suffering in terms of trying to identify ourselves. We don't know, do we want to be a real democracy? Do we want to be kind of a partial democracy? Do we want to treat everybody as equal? Do we not want to treat everybody as equal? We're struggling in the same way that you and I did through middle school, right?
Not only when it comes to equality or how we behave towards each other, not just the human pattern of being an American, but also realize since 2023, Americans who saved all that money, those $2 trillion during the pandemic, we've spent all those savings. The average American does not even have $400 in their savings account. Almost half of us don't even have $1,000 in their savings account. He's absolutely correct. But that's not a bad thing, because that means that America still has room for growth.
My children mean the world to me. And what I want to do is give them a life where they have the choice to do anything they want to do. Unfortunately, I don't believe our country for the next 5 to 10 years is going to be the kind of country that allows children of today to choose and be whatever they want to be. I think our country has some growing up of its own to do before we really offer people equal access to opportunities.
Now, what does he mean by his children, and meaning other children or individuals, won't have the opportunity to grow up to be who they want to be. Right now, through social media and other platforms, music and so forth, they are manipulating us with a lot of propaganda to actually be whatever we're being programmed to be. Also, being a man in the United States means be prepared to be manipulated and used by individuals that only want you for material gain. Also, when it comes to asking about a man's mental health, it is not a common thing for even your wife or your girlfriend in the United States, at least along your mother, to ask you, how are you doing today?
So for me, if I was my 11-year-old son, when I turned 15 or 16 years old and I start to really care about something, I would like to be in a place where I can explore that thing. I don't think that's going to be in the United States. I think that's going to be in Europe. I think that's going to be in the Middle East. I think that's going to be in Latin America, where he will have.
Notice the areas that he mentioned: parts of Europe, the Middle East, Latin America. As many of you know that I've been living 6 years in Latin America. You can still be masculine because women want to be 100% feminine. They want equality here. Yes, they want the same rights that men have. That's true, and they should have those rights no matter where women are in the world. But they still respect family, culture, legacy, heritage, unlike what we do in the United States.
What do you think about what's going on at the moment with geopolitics as it relates to like China and the US? There's a bit of a power struggle going on, and there has been, but a lot of people forecast that China is eventually going to overtake, or maybe it already has, the US as the sort of global economic force. Are you preparing for that? Do you think it's going to happen?
I think that there's two realistic outcomes and there's one less realistic outcome. The most realistic outcome is that the United States and China continue to compete and reach parity, equality with each other. That's the most realistic outcome. Maybe the United States remains 10% bigger. Maybe China gets 2% bigger economically, but they approach parity. They approach equality. The world is accustomed to one superpower. Once there are two superpowers, everything changes. There's two massive languages, and you're going to have to choose which language you speak. There's two currencies. Which currency are you going to save your money in? There's competing priorities. There's competing politics. There's equally massive, sophisticated militaries. When you are in one of those two countries, at the moment that they reach parity, you are in the most dangerous position, because the number one target for China will be the United States. The number one target for the United States will be China. Right now, there's not parity. There's not equality. So the United States has to worry about everybody. And China doesn't really have to worry about many people at all.
And since China doesn't have to worry about people looking at them as the big dog or as the target or the example to be, it makes it a lot easier for China to be just a little bit more stealthy in their behavior. Because realize what China is doing is not only making money on its land, but it's also going to other countries and continents such as Africa, and they are making investments to make money off of Africa's human resources as well as natural resources. So do realize China is making moves quietly while we are sitting at the top trying to hold position. So he's right. It could be a situation one day where China is just as equal as the United States.
But as that equality gets closer and closer, there's more and more threat. Think about it in business terms. When you're the industry leader in your business,
Google,
you don't have to worry about much. You have to worry about all the little guys, but nobody's really a direct threat. But as soon as somebody else rises to meet you, you have to worry about it. The leader used to be Yahoo, right? Yahoo had to see what it's like to lose and gain parity with Google, only to then be eclipsed, right? So most probable outcome, we reach parity. Second most probable outcome is that China does supersede us by small amounts, right? 5% GDP, 10% GDP. And the United States has to regain its momentum to try to gain back the edge. So now you have this cycle back and forth, right? Where for 5 years, China is the leading GDP. For 5 years, the United States is the leading GDP. And you have this waffling back and forth, which makes you even less secure than if you were in direct parity. But that's a scary place to be as well.
Before he goes any further, who is this guy that's talking, who went to the Air Force Academy for college? He also became a fighter pilot. This is the guy, once he was done being a fighter pilot, he was hired to be one of the few individuals hired to work in the nuclear facilities 30 miles underground, and had to just sit there with a key around his neck. It was him as well as a partner that had a key around their neck. And whenever it's time to put the keys in and turn the nuclear codes, they were the guys that did it. And after that, he was hired to be a CIA operative. In other words, he was a spy, not like James Bondish, but under the same type of umbrella. So if anybody understands the global economy, the global structures, and what's going on behind the scenes in the United States as well as around the world, I think Andrew is qualified. So don't take for granted what he's saying. Even though a lot of times when passport bros are speaking, you guys take us for granted, hopefully you listen to what Andrew has to say about leaving the United States before 2030.
To lose all the influence to get there. And when you're there, you never know how long it's going to last.
Do you think we're already engaged in a form of World War III?
Yeah, absolutely. I think World War III is already happening. I think World War III is not what people think it was going to be. I think people were afraid that World War III was somehow going to look like another World War II. Instead, World War III is a war of proxy nations. It's a war. It's a war where smaller third world countries are competing against each other, and they're being funded by larger countries that are actually in conflict with one another. Ukraine and Russia. U.S. is funding Ukraine. Russia is obviously taking care of itself. But the real conflict in Ukraine isn't about Ukraine. It's about the West versus Russia. The same thing's going to happen with Taiwan and China. When the time comes that China makes its biggest move on Taiwan, it's already made the small moves on Taiwan. When it makes its largest move on Taiwan, it's going to become a question of China versus the West and whoever supports Taiwan.
Same thing is happening here in South America when it comes to Venezuela trying to invade Guyana. What is the big deal about that? Well, Guyana is the world's fastest growing economy right now. What do you mean by that? The average economy for most countries only grow 1 to 2% a year, including the United States. But because oil was discovered in Guyana a few years back, well, their economy has grown over 126%. They are scheduled to be the world's fastest growing economy until 2030. The oil that was discovered off the coast of Guyana is making them billions. And so their neighbors next door, Venezuela, who never looked at Guyana for anything for years, are now trying to invade them. Now Guyana is being protected by the United States, Brazil, as well as other European countries that have a large stake in the success of the Guyanese people and the oil that's been discovered off the coast of that country. In other words, he's saying World War III is not a battle between the larger countries that we're accustomed to, but it's these little small countries that many of us don't notice on a regular basis that are being funded by the larger countries. That's the version of World War III that he's saying that we're in the middle of right now.
So going back to where we started then, the average Joe. The average Joe is listening to this conversation now, and what they really want is to make their life better in whatever subjective measure that they consider better to be. They want to start that business. They want to launch that project. They want to get outside of this sort of emotional prison that they live in, where their life is dominated by perception, what they think, their own sort of confines of their identity. What is the sort of closing argument and closing advice you give to that average Joe to liberate themselves so that they can pursue whatever they want to pursue?
So the most important thing is to take action. That is the most, even if it's the wrong action, if you take the wrong step, if you take the first step in the wrong direction, the difference between you and the person who doesn't take a step at all is the world. You have to take the first step. You have to take some kind of action. Just by taking action, you show that you're not trapped by fear. You show that you're willing to challenge your own perception of the world and try to gain some perspective. It doesn't matter what that action is. I don't care whether you read a book, whether you buy a program, whether you sell your first prototype. Take some kind of action, because 9 out of every 10 people are not going to take any action. You already have an advantage just by trying. And so few people understand that. They think there's some kind of advantage in waiting.
Let's pause right there. He's absolutely correct. First thing that he said is you've got to take actions. You can dream all you want. You can write goals down and plans. You could sit back and tell yourself and tell everybody else that you're going to do this particular thing. But if you're not taking any actions towards it, it'll show itself. Second thing that he said that was very important that I discovered, the reason why a lot of individuals have succeeded in their endeavors, not because they were the best, the smartest, the richest, but because they were the only ones that did something. A lot of times we succeed and win the race because nobody else ran when the gun was fired. Just imagine if you were going to the Olympics and you were a runner and you just made it to the Olympics. You weren't one of the best, and they put you down in the runner's block with the best in the world racers from Jamaica, from the United States and other parts of the world, the best 100-yard runners. And they fired off the gun. And you were the only one that ran, the only one. Would you win the race? Why? Because you were the only one that ran. Always remember that. He's absolutely correct. You've got a heads up on everybody if you just start. If you plan on being a passport bro, in other words, getting your passport, and then setting the goal of going to visit a country, not Canada, not Mexico, not the Caribbean islands, but going somewhere out of your sphere of the West and actually seeing if what we are saying as passport bros, blue book gentlemen, and other individuals, are we telling the truth about these other countries? You get a chance to see it for yourself, or you can go back to the United States and say, they lied. It's not true. Either way, at least you went for it. You tried to do something. So he's absolutely correct. First thing it is, take action. Second thing, realize your competition is smaller than what you think it is.
The longer you wait, all you're really doing is giving the other 9 people a chance to be the first one to take a step. If you take the first step, you beat the competition right out of the gates. And you know this as well as I do. Even if your first 3 or 4 steps are fumbles and trips and you fall on your face, by the time you stand up, you're 4 steps away from the rest of the competition. And you've learned a lot in those first 4 steps. So my suggestion is take action. Take action using the skills that we talked about today. Take action using the skills that you've talked about on some other podcast. Just take action.
That's the most important thing that he said today. Let's do a recap. First thing he said that him and his family, they're out by 2027. They're leaving the United States. Second thing he said that economically, it looks like that both countries, China and the United States, will be competing with each other in up and coming years. In other words, United States won't always be the superpower that it is today. That's just historically how superpowers work. So let's not be upset and act like he's anti-American or we're anti-American. That's not true. We're just basing this off of historical examples. The last thing that he said was, do realize you're going to have to take actions, whether it be while you're still in the States taking actions, or whether it be if you plan on leaving the States. Take actions. Be a verb, not a noun. I always say that. I used to work in a nursing home for a couple of years. I was the guy that worked in the dietary department, meaning in the kitchen, when I first started working there. And I was the guy that delivered the food to each one of the areas, and then I came back and picked up the empty trays. I was a young person at that time period doing that. What I discovered was this. From going from floor to floor to floor and talking to older people on each floor, you know what I discovered? That all nursing homes, no matter where they are in the United States or assisted living facilities, have 2 residents. One resident is older people and the other resident is regret. And I discovered one thing: there is far more regret that lives in nursing homes than there are older people. Don't be one of those people that when you get of age, you're going to live with a lot of regret because you didn't take actions. But since I believe in you and you believe in yourself, take actions. If you need any help when it comes to relocating to another country, reach out to us. Our email is in the description. We'll be able to set up a consultation with you, and we'll make sure that you're able to take the proper steps, just like many of us have. Well, once again, my name is Andrea, and you're watching Love Crossing Borders Travel Unraveled Edition. Click that like button. We like you. Make sure you like us too. And we'll see you in the next video as we keep our lives on airplane mode.